Do you worship what you know or what you do not know? If I answer, I worship what I know, they immediately reply, the people he's arguing against, what is the essence of the object of worship? Then if I confess that I am ignorant of the essence, they turn to me again and say, so you worship, you know not what? I answer that the word to know has many meanings. We say that we know the greatness of God, his power, his wisdom, his goodness, his providence over us, and the justness of his judgment, but not his very essence. The question is, therefore, only put for the sake of dispute. Oh, really? I'm not quoting right now. Someone would actually introduce things into arguments that are only there for the sake of dispute? Even long, long ago? Yes, unfortunately. Thankfully, Basil never had to deal with Twitter. The question is, therefore, only put for the sake of dispute. For he who denies that he knows the essence does not confess himself to be ignorant of God, because our idea of God is gathered from all the attributes which I have enumerated. Now, please note what Basil's doing here. And note that there, to this day, exists a fundamental difference between East and West on this topic, and on a number of topics. And almost always when I deal with this issue, I am struck once again that we still struggle with terminological differences like we did back then. Even though we know that they struggled with terminological differences then, we continue to have them today. We continue to struggle to create a vocabulary to describe that which is timeless. And that's understandable. And that might mean that in certain areas where you do not have clear biblical revelation, there might be a need for humility, grace, and patience. Maybe. But especially when talking about the East does not hold to the same concept of simplicity as the West. In general, you have to say in general at almost any point. The East, while affirming, obviously, monotheism, differentiates between the essence of God and his attributes or his powers or his energies. Whereas the West, especially as formulated in a particularly strict fashion, the West, with Aquinas, moves toward a doctrine of simplicity that eventually, in Aquinas, results in the idea that the attributes of God in God are all the same thing and cannot be differentiated. They're only differentiated like you put light through a prism. And so the light going in is purely white. So in God, all of his attributes are the same. But through revelation, they become distinguished to us. And this is a major portion of the conflict and argument going on in Reformed circles right now, or at least Reformed Baptist circles, regarding the doctrine of simplicity. And so here is Basil, and he is saying, for he who denies that he knows the essence does not confess himself to be ignorant of God, because our idea of God is gathered from all the attributes which I've enumerated. But God, he says, is simple, and whatever attribute of him you have reckoned as knowable is of his essence. But the absurdities involved in this sophism are innumerable. Now, I stop just to point something out. There are young men, especially these days, who seem to believe that their understanding mediated through Aquinas and through modern writers, has no objectionable element to it. And they believe that this is apostolic. This has always been the view of the church. If you have made that statement and you have not read this, maybe you missed something. Maybe this wasn't a point of discussion 100 years earlier. Possibly. That's why maybe you should be a little slower to get out your cancel gun and start identifying people as heterodox or no longer worthy of being followed. Before you do that, you might want to consider some of these things. But, I repeat the sentence, but the absurdities involved in this sophism are innumerable. What's the sophism? But God, he says, is simple, and whatever attribute of him you have reckoned as knowable is of his essence. When all these high attributes have been enumerated, are they all the names of one essence? And is there the same mutual force in his awfulness and his loving kindness, his justice and his creative power, his providence and his foreknowledge, and his bestowal of rewards and punishments, his majesty and his providence? In mentioning any one of these, do we declare his essence? If they say yes, let them not ask if we know the essence of God, but let them inquire of us whether we know God to be awful or just or merciful. These we confess that we know. If they say that essence is something distinct, let them not put us in the wrong on the score of simplicity. For they confess themselves that there is a distinction between the essence and each one of the attributes enumerated. The operations are various and the essence simple, but we say that we know our God from his operations, but do not undertake to approach near to his essence. His operations come down to us, but his essence remains beyond our reach. Now, if you read the Turretin quote that I gave a few weeks ago, how does he deal with this? Ad intra, ad extra. Internally to God, all of his attributes are one. Ad extra, in his revelation, in his dealings with man, they are easily distinguished from one another. Which would mean that if it is God's intention to make himself known truly to his people, then what he is revealing truly to his people is different than that which is true within himself. Right? Just as long as you're comfortable with that. Because see, I'm not saying you guys are heterodox. You're the one saying, I am. Okay? Let's keep that in mind. But it is replied, if you are ignorant of the essence, you are ignorant of himself. Retort, if you say that you know his essence, you are ignorant of himself. A man who has been bitten by a mad dog and sees a dog in a dish does not really see any more than is seen by people in good health. He is to be pitied because he thinks he sees what he does not see. Do not then admire him for his announcement, but pity him for his insanity. Recognize that the voice is the voice of mockers when they say, if you are ignorant of the essence of God, you worship what you do not know. I do know that he exists. What his essence is, I look at as beyond intelligence. How then am I saved? Through faith. It is faith sufficient to know that God exists without knowing what he is, and he is a rewarder of them that seek him, Hebrews 11:6. Now, just by the way, that's just an insertion of the biblical reference. Nobody back then had divided Hebrews up into 11 chapters with the 6th verse, but anyway. So knowledge of the divine essence involves perception of his incomprehensibility. And the object of our worship is not that of which we comprehend the essence, but of which we comprehend that the essence exists. And the following counter question may also be put to them. No man has seen God any time. The only begotten which is in the bosom has declared him. It's interesting that he only has the only begotten. That's John 1:18. That's textual variant. So it's interesting that in this fairly early, relatively early, patristic citation. It's just monogenes, not monogenes huios or monogenes theos. Anyway, what of the Father did the only begotten Son declare? His essence or his power? If his power, we know so much as he declared to us. If his essence, tell me where he said that his essence was the being unbegotten. When did Abraham worship? Was it not when he believed? And when did he believe? Was it not when he was called? Where in this place is there any testimony in Scripture to Abraham's comprehending? When did the disciples worship him? Was it not when they saw creation subject to him? It was from the obedience of sea and winds to him that they recognized his Godhead. Therefore, the knowledge came from the operations and the worship from the knowledge. Do you believe that I am able to do this? I believe, Lord, and he worshiped him. So worship follows faith, and faith is confirmed by power. But if you say it, the believer also knows, he knows from what he believes, and vice versa, he believes from what he knows. We know God from his power, we therefore believe in him who is known, and we worship him who is believed in. Point is, kids, this is not the first time in history that there have been arguments and disagreements over how far outside the range of the direct light of Scripture you can go in coming to conclusions concerning that which is beyond our comprehension. There are so many places in Scripture where we are given the opportunity to see and hear things that man should talk about grace. Beyond the veil of eternity, drawing aside the veil so that we might see things that we would never know otherwise. But we're dependent upon Scripture for that. But it only goes so far. And so when we take biblical truths of monotheism and eternality and creatorship and power, and we put them together, as long as they are biblical statements, well, that's an appropriate analysis based upon revelation. But how far can you go until you have completely gotten outside the range of the light provided by Scripture? And once you get out into the woods, be very, very slow to start saying to somebody else who's not following the same path as you that they are now heterodox or even heretical when you're far outside the light of Scripture. I mean, you can chuck Basil if you want, I suppose, but you do not have a unanimous tradition, quote unquote, to make appeal to. And we, as Protestants, shouldn't be making appeal to that tradition in the first place. Read them, understand them, of course. Critically analyze them in the light of Scripture. I thought that's how we did things.